Arctic's P120 fan is the oft-recommended go-to for users where quiet performance is a priority. And on top of that, they are very affordable. In the same family, the Bionix P120 is a more gaming-focused product with more color options and higher RPMs. Well, today, the P family gets another member. And it's a really interesting one because it's the first RGB fan ever in Arctic's lineup. Here's the Bionix P120 A-RGB. Hey, and welcome to Machines and More. I have to say, an RGB member of the P family was totally unexpected, but it's a welcome surprise that I think will give you folks more options for your builds. So let's dive right in and take a look at the fan right next to the non-RGB Bionix P120. This 120mm PWM fan is a rather solid chunk next to the P120 it's based on, and you can easily feel it's got way more heft too. The fan is encased in a thick, enclosed plastic shroud, which contains all the electronics and wiring. Usually along with A-RGB comes another set of electronics, which makes more cables and connections necessary. But the interesting thing about this fan when you take it out of the box is, where's the wire? If you look at the fan, there's two 8-pin connectors on opposing sides. One's labeled power in and one's labeled power out. So to connect the fan cable and 5-volt A-RGB to this fan, you use the connector that Arctic supplies, which has ends for both connections. Now you can hook this up directly to your motherboard headers, and then, really nice touch here, to get to the next fan, you just need to use a connector cable to daisy chain multiple A-RGB P120 fans. Now in theory, that will save you a few sets of splitter cables, but that is contingent on your system running the same fans. If you are running other fans and other RGB components like in this test system here, you will still need splitter cables, or at a very minimum, you'll need to put the first one of these Arctic fans on the end of your cable runs. Also, do be careful about how many fans you can chain together. This particular fan is labeled at 0.16 amps, so in theory you can have 6 of these on a 1 amp motherboard header, although you should probably provide a small buffer if you don't want to accidentally fry your motherboard header, which would be a very expensive mistake. I'd estimate ballpark that 4 of these should be no problem. This is a 120mm fan, which means that it's 120mm square, but there is one notable departure from the typical 120mm form factor. It's 30mm thick. As a case fan, as long as you have clearance, that's not an issue, but as a radiator fan, you will need to get longer screws, since most rad screws are sized with a 25mm fan in mind. And as a heatsink fan, it provides another challenge since most heatsink fan clips are sized for 25mm as well. Now it's really tight when you try to mount it up, but I was able to stretch the clips enough to clip onto the SE224XT heatsink I have in the test system. Now speaking of this heatsink, I tested the performance of the fan in push-pull configuration. Noise at given RPMs are pretty similar to both the Arctic Bionix P120 it's based on and the Noctua NF-A12x25. In fact, these fans are a bit better dampened, so they can spin up a bit faster than both of those. The difference is about 40 RPM. Now, to get an idea of what the higher RPM performance of these fans might look like for an air cooler, thermal testing was done on a Ryzen 5 5600X, locked at 4.6 gigahertz on 1.325 volts. Now, some of you might have seen the videos on this ID cooling SE224XT, and what an amazing heatsink this is for single chiplet Ryzen CPUs. And pairing it with a couple of upgraded fans is a fantastic way to max out this cooler. The test was a 10-minute blender render with the fans locked at speeds yielding 2.5 decibels above the noise floor. And this equated to about 1500 RPM for the fans mounted on this cooler. And that noise level is for the whole system. This really would give you an idea of the performance of the fans during a heavy CPU load. Taking a look at the graph here, the new RGB fans perform as expected relative to the original Bionix. In fact, they are a little better due to the slightly higher RPM that they can run at, given the same noise level. The Noctua NF-A12s appear to perform a little better, even at those lower RPMs, which to me indicates a little bit better static pressure performance, but it is only marginally ahead, and these 3 fans are extremely close in performance. and I would be happy with any of these three running on this heatsink. The fact that any of these three fans can keep the 5600X in check below 70 degrees at the highest boost clock and higher voltage means that with a suitable heatsink, users can easily get the highest boost clocks on PBO2, and you can even go higher still. I really like to recommend this particular cooler for this upgrading purpose, since it's a very budget-oriented cooler with a very basic fan, so you don't spend any more on that stock fan than you need to, and then you can just kit the cooler out with the fans that you actually want. Here is a recording of the three fans on the heatsink at the same measured noise level, keeping in mind that sound levels perceived by the human ear may reflect differently on a decibel meter. Now, since these are in the P family of Arctic fans, many users, myself included, have noted a certain vibratory motor growl or whine that happens in the 1000 to 1300 RPM range with the P12s. And I put this fan through that RPM range and beyond just to give you an idea of what you might expect. As you might have noticed, smack at 1300 RPM, we unfortunately get that odd vibration. As the fan ramps up or down, you'll hear a little whine as well. It's not as bad as what you hear at the fixed 1300 RPM. In theory, this fan can go up to 2300 RPM, but I don't think users should be running it that high out of concerns for noise and the fact that you're well past diminishing returns at that point. If you need to run fans that high on a regular basis, you really need to size up something in your system. Either your heatsink is too small or you don't have enough radiator surface area for your components. So while it's nice that the fan can go that high, I don't think it's at all necessary. In general though, I think performance this good with the 5600X means you can safely lock it to 1200 RPM or less and just enjoy the lower noise, possibly mitigating that growl. And for gaming utilizations, you're not going to see the same thermal load as an AVX workload in Blender anyway. There is one thing that this fan can do that the others can't though, and that's light up. If you don't care about lighting, I'd highly recommend just picking up the P120 Bionix, since essentially you are getting a similar fan just without lighting. This fan features a single halo of 12 addressable LEDs, so you can get multiple colors simultaneously in the LED ring and also control the behavior of the LEDs independent of the others, yielding some very interesting lighting effects if that's what you like. This new fan has an MSRP of $25 US, and there will also be a 3-pack bundle with a remote controlled hub for $60. I think that is a pretty fair premium over the Bionix P120, which is around $15. And Arctic doesn't plan on bundling this with any air coolers yet, but obviously that may happen in the future. Other than the motor noise, I did want to note a couple of points of constructive feedback on this fan and where users may want to pay some attention to when you're considering it. The first is that the 30mm thickness is really a strange place to be at. This thick shroud gives the fan a real premium feel, but at the same time, having to source a specific length of radiator screw almost makes this a deal breaker when there are other competing products at 25mm. Heatsink fan clips have more give, but still there's no guarantee it will work. As a case fan, it's fine, but it's also a bit more than some would be willing to spend for that purpose. In addition, this also limits your RAM height for some builds if you want to run a push-pull. For this review with this mini-itx board, I could just pull one of the 16 gig sticks off the board, but I would typically want to run 2 sticks regardless of the single stick capacity. The other point is the 8-pin connector placement. As you'll note, they are placed on the same end of the fan on opposing sides. If you use these as a radiator or case fan, they'll typically be placed right next to each other. And since you have to connect the power out from one fan to the power in on the other fan, it would be nice if these ports could be adjacent to one another on the same side just on different ends. And I would prefer that one from a cable management perspective, because that way you can hide those cables and just have the connector cable run sequentially down the chain on the hidden side. As a push-pull heatsink fan, you also run into the same issue, and having those connectors on the same side means you can hide those cables on the non-visible side of the fan but still connect them easily, and that leads to a cleaner overall look. This is, after all, an RGB fan that is meant to be looked at. All in all, this is a great fan. The performance is mixing up with some of the best in the 120mm space, and you're not really compromising on performance by going with these RGB fans. I really look forward to seeing these in some of your builds soon. A big thanks to Arctic today for providing these review samples for the launch. I will leave product links down below for your consideration, and please click subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thanks for watching today, and I'll see you again soon.